for a change?
I am talking to you.
Then get ready to explore the quantum possibilities. It's time to transform that outdated paradigm into something universal and new. Time to uncover the truth hidden beneath the veil of lies. A time to think outside the box as we link to a higher consciousness. Welcome to the awakening. And now the hosts of Broadcast Team Alpha, Nori Love and Augie Nost.
Well, hello, timid, tentative, and transparent time travelers. Are you ready to take conversation way outside of the box? I am so excited for our guest tonight. But before we get started, I just want to thank you as always. My heart is overflowing with gratitude to be here with you. Grateful for your donations, grateful for your love, grateful for you being here with us. You can connect with us at broadcastteamalpha.com. If you are still on Facebook, we do have Broadcast Team Alpha page there. And you can also connect with us Sundays. We meet at the Mastermind Connection, and we meet to evoke changes by intention into the quantum realm. And we have an incredible time. It's an amazing group of people, and we get together to do exactly that. So if you would like to join us, if you'd like some information, you can send an email to themastermindconnection@gmail.com. And some Sundays, Alchemides, a Pleiadian that is channeled, drops in to give us some pearls of wisdom. So you may be there when that happens. And if you know that this physical vehicle is the gateway to your 5D, you can connect with me at the Center for Radiant Wellbeing.com. And right now, we're in the middle of changing the format of the classes to include more holistic therapies. We do brain yoga. I do distance Reiki. We do Reiki and energy healing. So we have all kinds of amazing classes along with some traditional exercise classes. So those are all the ways you can connect with us. And Augie, how are you? Oh, you're muted. Or you're time traveling. He's time traveling again. Augie, come back.
Yep, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? I muted myself.
It's 2021. You back?
Yeah, I think I've done this. Must be the 18th time I've done that.
Okay.
All right. Now, I tell you, folks, we have a wonderful guest. This is going to be so interesting. Don't go anywhere because we're going to keep you on the edge of your chair. Because our guest is a legend in the paranormal field. He has written 25 books, and most of you probably know his name. He is a world traveler. He's a researcher of the strange and unusual sciences. He's an author, and two of them writes about the Montauk Project and time travel, where a lot of things happen that most people don't know anything about. And he also writes about what's inside the earth. And that includes the Bucegi, however that is pronounced, Bucegi Mountains, cave in Romania, where an alien race of giants came here and left a holographic library for us to decipher when we became smart enough. And we are smart enough, so we have been able to decipher some of that, and our guest is going to talk about what the aliens left us. We also have a great interest in common, and that is time travel. He has a website called timetraveleducationcenter.com. And write that one down because I was just there, and you folks, I tell you, there's some really neat stuff over there. You got to see that. He also there explains and discusses the science behind time travel, the mechanics of it, and this gets very interesting. So stay on the edge of your chair because here we go with our guest, Peter Moon. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be back with you.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Gosh, you have written so much. Where in the world do we want to start?
Well, I think it might be good to start with where you left off, which was the Time Travel Education Center. That website was put together in 2015. At the end of 2015, 6 years ago, or 5.5 years, almost 5 years ago, as a result of my collaboration and association with Dr. David Anderson, the time travel scientist who used to live on Long Island. He had a laboratory on Long Island, which is where I met him, and he eventually took me to Romania in 2008, where I began to make extensive connections in that rather mysterious and incredible and very misunderstood country. So, and you were talking about this great secret or place underneath the mountains that they call them the Bucegi. It's in English we would say Bucegi, but they don't pronounce the I like that. They're Bucegi Mountains. So that's a great chamber beneath the Sphinx. There's a Sphinx in the Bucegi Mountains, and it's about 300 yards or meters underneath that Sphinx. They discovered a chamber that was ancient and inaccessible. What they found that was modern what we would call modern technology, but it was ancient technology, and that has been the subject of now 7 books that I have published in the English language. They're Romanian books that I publish, and now I translate them myself directly. And I don't speak Romanian, but I've grown I have a Romanian wife, and I'm very adept at using the Google Translate, and my editing and English skills are such that I can make them more readable and understandable in English than they are in the Romanian. This is what the Romanians tell me. And I've been praised by the author himself. He says, I can't believe what you do with these books, because I have a very good understanding of some of the principles, and I also have editing skills. So it's all been very good. But these books, and of course, you mentioned you're fascinated with this, what's underneath Bucegi, and there are many more interesting things than just what's underneath there in Romania. But that particular chamber, as is described in the book, and I must state that I have not been inside of it. It's only by special access. The author did tell me that he would do everything possible in the future to get me to see it, to actually be in it, and maybe that will happen. There's Dr. David Anderson has also said that someday he would like to show me his actual time reactor, which can affect time travel. And while this is very exciting and probably would be the most exciting things I could do, I have a job to do as a writer and as a publisher, and that seems to be my most important work on this earth, rather than experimenting with strange stuff and strange projects. Rather than to experiment with them, I'm supposed to write about them, because maybe I can write about them better than the people who are doing the projects, and maybe they can do better in the projects than I can do there. So, even though you haven't been inside of it, you have been able to get some information from some very credible sources. So I think we should take it really serious. What you found? It should be taken seriously, because, and especially about this inside the earth. Because of the way you express this keen interest, I don't know how many of the books you've read personally, but the 5th book in the series, which is about 2 years old, Inside the Earth, talks about, this took years to get to the place where he could write the book Inside the Earth, where he goes deeper into the earth than what's beneath the Sphinx, and he contacts civilizations that are extant within the earth. He also talks, some of them are extant in the physical realm, some of them are extant in what you would call an interdimensional realm, and he goes into the science of what's inside the earth. And this is the most comprehensively credible dissertation on the science of what is inside the earth, and how how can you justify going into an area that's science believes is nickel, iron nickel core with molten lava surrounding it? And he dispels this theory and why this theory is incorrect.
Yeah, and because the government's expression of what they think is inside the Earth is only a theory anyway. They haven't been able to prove any of this. It never extends beyond being a theory, as far as I understand it.
It's correct, and it's a very faulty theory, and he explains very much why in the book. But I think it might digress to go into that, because then it becomes we're dealing in a scientific referendum, which is which is certainly of value, but he covers it in the book, and I would recommend people read the book.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to be able to represent it verbally as well if I'm got the book in front of me and freshen my mind on the exact principles. So our hour might be spent, but I would encourage people to do that if they're interested.
Absolutely, and that's where you find at timetraveleducationcenter.com, and you got I think most of them there, or all of them there.
They'll find the books at skybooks.usa.com. skybooks.usa.com. You can also get them on Kindle and Amazon. Peter Moon, Transylvania. But the skybooks.usa.com will list all the books and summarize their contents.
All right. Yeah. Now, for the say Bucegi Mountains.
But you can say Bucegi. You can say whatever you want. I understand what you're talking about.
Bucegi, and inside there, go into a little bit of the story, how this was discovered and when they got in, and it wasn't that easy to get to what was in there. They evidently lost some people, and there's a lot of stuff that happened there before the
first book in the series, Transylvania Sunrise, goes into the incredible drama surrounding the opening of the chamber, and it begins with a psychic individual who's born psychic in Romania, communist Romania, and he had a huge umbilical cord. It was just huge, and any such births or strange phenomena at birth were reported to the security, and the security came in and they brought in the head of their paranormal security department, Dr. Zien. Dr. Zien was loaned to Romania by what was then known as Red China, because they had a cultural exchange between the two communist countries. Romania sent over, they educated Chinese, and in return, the Chinese gave them the head of their paranormal department, who was investigated this young child, this baby, and would monitor him as he grew up. Eventually, when he became a teenager, training him to head up their what's called Department Zero, their most secretive intelligence department, that that really hardly anybody knew anything about except for the president and the head of security. So when he was Cesar Brad, this young man who was very gifted, he was approached by an Italian Freemason, and the Italian Freemason spoke fluent Romanian, which is not typical for Italians. They have a hard time with the Romanian language, whereas the Romanian language is a root language, and they understand Italians very easily. But that's a side point. But anyway, he spoke fluent Romanian, and he told them that he represented the Masonic P2 Masonic Lodge. I believe it was P2, but it was a Masonic Lodge in Italy. And he was also a member of the Bilderberger Group, and that he also, in this discussion, was representing the certain faction of the Pentagon of the United States of America. Because he was a Freemason, this would have been a Masonic faction of the Pentagon, and the Pentagon had found that there was this chamber underneath the Romanian Sphinx that they couldn't penetrate with their satellite ground penetrating radar. They didn't know what was there, so he asked them, he wanted to get permission to basically bring in the American with their high-powered atomic lasers and excavate. And of course, Cesar Brad, the Romanian, was shocked. How could this guy even know that I exist, let alone my role? He was very struck by that. And he thought that this man was very evil, but he had no choice but to play along, because if he didn't, he would have lost his position. So anyway, he played along, and there's a lot of drama and political intrigue that goes in. But in the long and short, there's a lot of challenges in opening it. And finally, there's a wall, there's an energetic wall once they open up this cave, and they can't get past it until they see that there's this slab on the wall with a print. It's like a handprint. And Cesar Brad puts his hand into it, figuring out, and it actually matches to his print. It's almost as if he was fated to do it. Then the barrier lifts and they can access the chamber. To make a long story short, they get into the chamber, and there is what is called, they find these huge tables for giants, and they're compartmentalized. So it's like, if you could imagine a board like on that show Jeopardy, that's not how they describe it, where there's certain little panels, but it's like laying flat like a table. And if you put your hand over one, it'll read out your DNA. It'll read out your hand in microscopic form, going down to the DNA level, to the molecular and atomic level, the closer you put it. And then if you put your hand over another table in another section, it will show a star system and an animal from what it looks like it comes from this other star system. It's all holographic. If you put your hand over another compartment or slab of the table simultaneously, it'll show another animal in another star system, and it'll show also, in addition to that, a hybridization of both animals. If you bred the DNA of this animal with that animal, it'll show you the combination. And by the way, science doesn't talk about it a lot. You'll see it on the internet sometimes, of hybridized animals that have been done quite extensively, experiments with like zebras and donkeys and that sort of thing. So I don't want to digress onto that, but basically this is a fascinating feature of this. As you go deeper into the chamber, there's what's called the projection hall, which features a system. I mean, I can't describe what it looks like, but it's a holographic rendering of the history of the world. And it goes only up to about 400 or 500 AD, but you can go look into it and see the history of the world. And every individual who sits in that chair is going to see a different story. Like if you see it, you might see one that's more peculiar to your genetic history and ancestors or your particular interests. I would see another one in the same vein. So this is a history of the world. And in that chamber, there is 3 tunnels. And the 3 tunnels go to 3 different general locations. They go inside the earth. One goes to a similar facility underneath the Giza Plateau in Egypt, which is the subject of the 3rd book, The Mystery of Egypt, the first tunnel. There's another one that goes into the inner earth itself. That's the subject of the 5th book, Inside the Earth, the 2nd tunnel. And we just recently published a book in October, The Etheric Crystal, the 3rd tunnel, which talks about a 3rd tunnel that goes to Baghdad. It also, and that's they only discuss what they find in Baghdad. The 3rd tunnel extends beyond Baghdad, goes off to Tibet, and with an offshoot to Mongolia. There's also an earlier offshoot in Romania where it goes up to what are known as the Bucegi Mountains, where there's a lot of strange stuff there. But he only talks about the Baghdad aspect. And so anyway, that chamber in Baghdad, or a part of it, I don't know if it's the whole one or a part of it, was discovered by the Americans in the Iraq war in the 90s. They discovered this chamber, and what happened was it had holographic projections, and there were American guards guarding it. And what happened was, when they actually breached the chamber in Romania, what happened was, at the time they breached it, there was a holographic projection of the chamber being breached in Romania, and it was being witnessed by the soldiers guarding the installation in Baghdad. So they saw it, and they reported up command channels. And according to the book, it went up to President Bush, George W. Bush. If you can imagine him doing anything like this. And he called the president of Romania and wanted to know what his troops were doing in Romania, because this was all done secretly. And the president of Romania knew nothing about it, and he called Cesar Brad, or he called Cesar Brad's senior in the military, Colonel or General Obadia. He's passed away now. Obadia. And Obadia had to go to the president and tell him everything that was happening. And what happened was you had Americans in Romania. Neither one of the presidents knew what was going on. And there became a diplomatic crisis between the two countries. And there was a lot of tension and understandable tension, like what's going on. And there was, the Romanians possessed the territory, the Americans possessed the technology. And the long and short, out of all the tensions that took place, resulted in Romania becoming a member of NATO. And Romania and America are now staunch allies. Mm-hmm. And this had not existed this way. Romania was a part of the Axis in World War II. It was the third biggest European Axis nation. I think it's bigger in size than Italy. And it was Italy, Romania, and Germany. So it was now aligned with NATO, and it still is. And that's sort of where the book ends. Now, the author, Radu Cinemar, he was handpicked by Cesar Brad to write this story. And he handpicked him, and he was allowed to go into the chamber and view it for about 45 minutes or an hour just to write the first book and all the circumstances. And then as the other books progress, Radu gets more and more involved in the story to the point where he is now a member of Department Zero and is working with the people of the inner earth. Mm. It's been a long, slow development, and it's a very coherent development. And his publisher wrote to me and said that he would have a book coming, a new book coming. So that would be the 8th book in the series.
Oh, yeah. So there is a connection between these Bucegi Mountains and the inner earth also then?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And there are much more substance behind this than I can even go into in this talk. And it has to do with all of these stories fulfill the ancient spiritual tradition of Romania, which is a tradition that I've been introduced to, worked my way into, and entered into. And perhaps, and I've been accepted even to the point where when I went to their most holy site, Sarmasichatuza, and it's the heart of Transylvania, when I went there, maybe for the 3rd time, I met this woman who was young and beautiful and destined to be my wife. I didn't know I met many young women in Romania, and they were just friends. I was never going there for romance or for looking.
Yeah.
Did not want to.
I'm sorry, but we only got 30 seconds left before the break. So let's go to break now, and we'll come back and continue this. And I want to hear a little more about this, what's inside the chamber too, because that gets interesting. Stay with us, and we'll be right back.
And a big shout out to our chat room. Hello, everybody. I am not going to say hi to everybody individually because I'm quite rapt by this conversation. So, Peter, we were right at the point where you were talking about the young, beautiful woman that you met who became your wife.
This is very important. And it's not, well, it's very important because when I first got to Romania, and now keep in mind, I had received this book about a year after all of this stuff happened. And it was translated in English for me in hopes that I would publish in English. It sat at the bottom of my desk for 3 or 4 years. And it wasn't until I got involved in Qigong as a result of my Montauk research with a very gifted Qigong teacher that I ended up picking up this book and took it with me when I went to get my car fixed in Brooklyn by one of the students, and I read the book and decided I should publish it. And it took me months to negotiate the contract. And right after I negotiated the contract and completed it, within a week, I got an email from Dr. David Anderson, who I had not heard from in like 4 or 5 years. He said he wouldn't be able to work with me for 5 years. Here he is, and he says, how would you like to go to Romania? I'll pay the expenses for you and somebody else who wants to come with you, and you can visit Romania. And he took me to Romania. And when I got to Romania, his friends there, who were professors and very learned people, said, if you want to understand Romania, you must go to the capital of ancient Dacia, which is what the land was called, Sarmisegetuza, and you must spend 3 days there, and you go there, and you must do this. And I went back the next year, and I did. And it took me I'm not going to go through all the protocols, spiritual protocols I had to go through, but after making repeated journeys, the journeys were brought to me by other people saying, we want you to be our guide. We'll pay you to come here. That happened a couple of times. And other circumstances would bring me back there. That happened 3 times. And so I'm going to their sacred spot. And there's a legend in Romania. It says, if you meet a beggar and you give him something, he's testing your heart. He is really not a beggar. He is a Solomonari. This is where the word Solomon comes from. It means sun and moon. Ancient word, Solomonari. These are the spirits of the inner earth. These are the spirits that built these things they were talking about, these incredible structures. The Solomonari, and the Solomonari they initiated the ancient god of Romania called Zalmoxis. It's where we get the name Moxie, or the Yiddish term Moxie, or Moses. Moxie is Moses. Zalmoxis is the inspiration for the Judaic religion, the Christian religion, the Zoroastrian religion, because ancient history comes from Transylvania. And it's been obfuscated by, current and ancient politics. They've changed the alphabet and everything. They've done everything but change the language itself. So Romanians can understand all the Romance languages. That's why they're called Romance languages. So it's more root than Italian. So anyway, the Solomonari initiated Zalmoxis in the underground for 4 years, where he transformed from a human into a god. And the Solomonari are the initiators. So when you go to Transylvania, the people have this energy in them, whether they're aware of it or not. And so there I was led to meet this woman who was destined to be my wife. Her stepmother, who she calls her mother, is a spiritual teacher who interacts with the Solomonari. She was a general in the army, and her job as a general was to psychically analyze aeronautical equipment, because they don't distinguish. The Russians and the Romanians, they'll have the psychic or this, looking in the same room with the scientist, and they use both sides of the brain. So she's a very remarkable lady who's grew up with her teacher I can never remember that guy's name. He was a famous rocket scientist who was inspired Wernher von Braun. He was the mentor of Wernher von Braun. I just can't remember his name, but he's a famous rocket scientist. That was her teacher when she was in school.
Wow.
But and there's a whole German section of Transylvania in the city of Sibiu, which is where she grew up at least part of her time. Her father was Hindu. She looks Germanic, and she's also German. She's lived in Germany, and she knows the German and the Romanian language. She's still learning English. But in any case, she's provided valuable connections for me there. But the most remarkable thing is, as a result of spending time with what was to become my wife in a subsequent trip in Romania, I was brought by an archaeologist who one of the ladies at the hotel had wanted me to meet for a long time. And he brought me to this cave. And this was very special, because what a Solomonari will do is they will bring you to a cave. A Solomonari will show up as a beggar, and if you pass the test, he will open the heart of Romania to you. That's the legend. He will open the heart of Romania to you. Now, the first time I met a beggar, I didn't give him anything because I didn't have any money that was mine to give him. I had money for the group I was responsible for. And then one of the ladies taught me this legend. So I went back, and every time I see a beggar, I give them something. And how much more can you open the heart than to bring you this beautiful woman to be your wife? It's like I'm living the tradition. And I've been at times criticized for doing this. What are you going to see? Are you going to give money to every beggar that you see? By Romanians. And I said, wait.
It's a bunch of them.
I give this money, you're not going to see one. This one girl was a gypsy. I gave her money. I mean, how much did I give her? It was, it was no big deal. She was very appreciative. And I said, you're not going to see anybody else ask me for money on this trip. And then there was not. I knew that. They were, disparaging it, not getting what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so, but I knew what I was doing. And on that trip, so anyway, this archaeologist brought me to a cave. And he brought me and my friends to a cave. This is Chocolatina Cave. And it was a beautiful cave. It had a big mouth and water coming out of it. You couldn't go too far into it because there was too much water and too much darkness. So, but it was an incredible spot. And I didn't ask to go there. I didn't particularly want to go there. We had a day, and so we took a couple cars and we had a great day. Now, that was 2014. In 2015, Dr. David Anderson has come back into my life for a few months, and he agreed to do a podcast. And he did a podcast with me, but in the process, well, one of the things we had a long time to talk because he didn't have the proper headphones, and he needed to send out so we ended up in these long talks, and he told me that he was very impressed with an article I had written breaking down his time travel lecture that he did in 2009 in Romania. He lectured on time travel, and that became his website, the Anderson Institute, which is now up again. And I was able to break that down into simple language, which he said he was so impressed with. He says, can I use this when I go to talk at a university or somewhere? Because you took the patience. Nobody's taken the patience to break this down. And so I said, sure, well, it's your work. I said, I just clarified it. And so I put it into videos, and that's what became the Time Travel Education Center. But in the process of the podcast, even before the podcast, when we were just talking, I said, what can you tell me about Romania? Because he's always been kind of like mum on a lot of things. And he says, well, I'll see. He gets back to me, and he says, I can tell you about Romania. He says, there is a cave in Romania called Chocolatina Cave, and it is the hottest spot for time travel on the planet. There's more phenomena there than anywhere else on the planet. It's very important. And I said, David, did you know I was at Chocolatina Cave last summer? And he was completely blown away. How the hell could I end up there? Mm-hmm. He wanted to know where it was in relation to Sarmasejatusa, the holy site, because he had wanted to go there with me one time. And I said, well, it's about seven miles as the crow flies. Takes longer than 7 minutes to get there, though, but because of the mountains. And so this cave, I said, wow, this is important. So that following summer, I could not go back because my wife was new in this country. She couldn't drive, and I couldn't leave her here alone. So I waited till the next year, and I went back to that cave. And I've gone back 4 times, and I introduce my Romanian friends. I tell them about it. They go and investigate it. And the third time, we discovered another cave. And then I discovered on the third time a camp that was nearby. And it was, I went back. So I got back from the camp. When I got back to America, a friend of mine who's a movie director in Romania said, I just was at the camp with German. And he said there was an American here, but I don't remember his name 2 weeks ago. And he says, oh, that must be Peter Moon. So he says, yeah, was that you? I said, yes, it was me. So this man, this film director, Andre, who was trained in New York University to do films, he's doing an incredible film right now on the Solomonari. But he said that he arranged for me to stay there at the camp. So I went to the camp the summer before that, and I was brought into the cave. And I went a mile deep into the cave. And I'm sure I was right near the area where they did the time travel occurred. But it was quite an ordeal to do that, because you have to put on spelunking equipment, wetsuit, and a helmet with a light on it. And it was quite a journey. And David has reiterated that this is the most important spot. Now, what did I see? I saw a cave. I saw bats. But this area is so exciting that this is like stepping into the inner earth. This is, I can't separate it from the books. The books they go off in more, I guess, what you would call flamboyant directions. We're talking about all this incredible stuff. But that's where that was going, because you asked me about where that led to. So my experience into the Romania, into the Solomonari himself, is very deep. Now, these books, although the Solomonari is never mentioned in the books, these books are the work of the Solomonari. They are totally this, but they never say it. But it becomes obvious that these are spiritual forces putting these books together and coming through me, at least in the English language.
When
go ahead.
When these caves are time travel hotspots, how have people have experiences in there? Do they meditate in there, have experiences, or do they bring equipment with it? Or how?
Most of the exploration that's done there is scientific. And we know that David knows that from the scientific work that has been done there, that there is a mineral called hydroxystalactite. It's very hard to pronounce, and it's even harder to spell. It can only be formed by extreme heat. And the extreme heat would have to be produced by a device like a time reactor that actually manifests, changes of time. We can't go into that. It's called space-time motive force. That space-time motive force, which a time reactor produces incidentally as a side effect, is enough to solve all our energy problems. And there's even harvesting energy. Dr. David Anderson, you can see that on YouTube. He goes into the science of that. It's irrefutable science. But mankind is very slow. It's very slow to catch on to certain things. We're lucky that we can even catch on to this. But so that's an aspect of these books that will not necessarily be appreciated. And you're going there for a spiritual experience, and it can lead in a lot of different directions. For me, it's very focused. It's very deep. I do tell people about various things in my newsletter. I do have a newsletter, which is quarterly, the Montauk Pulse, which is available at the skybooks.usa.com website.
All right. And I want to just say about 3 or 4 words here for the people that joined us late in the show. We are talking with Peter Moon, that went to Romania and have investigated the cave where the giants left us a holographic library for us to decipher someday. And you did say that this was the tables inside the cave was for giants. They weren't for just regular folks like you and me. They were for giants, right?
Yeah, they said they would be about 9 feet tall. For a person, about 9 feet tall. And everything in those facilities is geared towards intuitive instruction. There's security systems, and they're just set up to teach you. And it's a process of initiation. And I think one of the most incredible things in reading about anytime he goes into the tunnels or even into the general facility, there is sort of like a light buzz, often accompanied by a colored hue that could be light green, light blue, light purple, depending on it. And it's kind of like takes you over and puts you in a mental state that's like a different vibration. If you can imagine, your body vibrating with a vibrator, except it's not so harsh as a vibrator, and it's more subtle, and it's almost like an inebriated state, but you're not inebriated like being drunk. It's more like an altered state where you're feeling just good vibes, like a meditative state, and you're kind of tripping on just the very fact of being. And this is the kind of, it's a vibrational frequency. And the trick to accessing the inner earth is vibrational frequency. We're all in a very dense vibration in this world. It's kind of obvious. When you go into the subtle realms of meditation, when you go into, like say, if somebody goes to Romania and think they're going to enter a physical cave, it doesn't work that way. You're going to enter it vibrationally. That may come via a cave. I've had enough cave exploration to feel adept at this, but at some point, you kind of step into. Now, this cave I'm talking about, the Chocolatina Cave, which is not close to the Bucegi, one of my friends in Romania took a group, he's a metaphysical teacher, he took 40 people into not that cave, but what's called the dry cave. And that dry cave is a cave that was opened from mining. They were mining bat guano. The bat guano is very rich. It's worth a lot of money for growing plants like cannabis, but it was also used as a fertilizer for bombs and explosives by the dictator. So, but he went into there like 4 kilometers and he found bones of a giant. He said he took pictures of them, which I think I have picture of a picture rather than the picture itself of a giant. He said those are giant bones. He's a doctor, a naturopath. He understands bones. He said those are definitely a human giant bones. There's other bare bones nearby, but that's a giant bone. And he's been in there, and he said one of his friends he was with disappeared, and the friend reappeared, but he had a weird experience. So that stuff, and he voiced that there was great danger in doing this. And the cave is not accessible to the public. He has his own connections. The only way you can go in there is to have a sort of an educational purpose. And I can do that. I know I want to go into that cave next. I've been into what's called the wet cave, which I think is much more spectacular, and that's the cave where the time phenomena occurred. But the whole complex, it's quite a big area, and there are a lot of caves in Romania, and with a lot of stories and legends, and it's a very fascinating place.
So in the time cave, there are people with experiences, or do they bring electronic equipment in there too?
I've never talked to anybody who's talked about metaphysical experiences in that cave. But when I got out of that cave that night, I talked to one of the guys at the camp, and he was very impressed. He says, he said, it's very good that you did that cave. It's a very hard journey. And what I didn't say is that I was sick. I had been sick before I went in there. I had some really challenging times the last few days before that, and I didn't even want to go. But when the guy said, "Do you want to go in the cave? We'll go tomorrow," I couldn't refuse that invitation. So I went. I was in there for 5 hours. I didn't need a bathroom break, and it's just an experience that I will. It was very hard because I was not very well. And my friend said, I was with one of my friends, my Romanian friends, he says, boy, they said, he says, after some part, you were just pushing the body. It didn't want to go, but you just pushed it. So it was the time of my life. And when I got out of that cave, the cave told me to put up an antenna nearby. So I've got a project when I go back to put up a ham radio antenna that I raised money for. And that was what the cave told me to do. Put up an antenna nearby the cave. It'll be at the camp nearby the cave. And that's a whole project that has yet to be done. When COVID relaxes, I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I see we have about 4 minutes left or so of the show. When you are writing more books, and take a little time to talk about your books, because this is just one small section of it that we have talked about. Do you have much more interesting stuff there? Just talk about your books a little bit.
Well, the second book of Transylvania Sunrise is the first book. The second one, Transylvania Moonrise, which is the sequel. The first chapter of that book, I think it's called the Man That Time Forgot. But that one chapter alone astounded me. It was all about alchemy by a real alchemist who befriends Radu, and he's actually a friend of the Dr. Zen, who turns out to be a Tibetan Lama. the Tibetan Lama wants to meet Radu. So that becomes a whole adventure. Of that chapter alone, I said, after I paid the translator to translate that book, I said I would have paid for that. I would have paid that much just to read that chapter. It was such an initiation, and it's somebody I'm supposed to meet. I'm supposed to meet someday, but I put off the meeting. So there's so many incredible characters and facets, and that's just the second book. And currently, I'm working on a book called The Roswell Deception, Demystification of and the Demystification of World War II, which goes into the whole story of what we know as the Roswell crash and what really happened there and how that was used to hide what the advanced technology that the Japanese had. And it will also convince you by the time you finish the book that the Japanese did indeed win the war. And you will see this in the Peace Treaty of San Francisco with the Japanese was signed in 1951, not aboard the Missouri in 45. That's standard history. So the War Department has spun everything around, so we think everything is not the way it is. And it's a very deep book.
Mm-hmm. That's about normal.
Yes.
They always do that. But and also, for the ones that joined us late into this show, in the first part of it, you really need to go back and re-listen to that, because that is where Peter Moon talks about what they found inside the cave in Romania, where the giants left us this holographic library on these crystal tables. So this gets interesting. They talk about the history of Earth and also much more. And where can they get a hold of your books and make contact with you?
Skybooks.usa.com. Skybooks.usa.com is where they can get the books. Visit the TimeTravelEducationCenter.com for information on time travel. And you can contact me at petermoon333@gmail.com, petermoon333@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, and I sometimes spout off things on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, what is next for you now? What do you?
Well, this book is The Roswell Deception, which will be published in ebook format in March. It'll be followed up shortly thereafter with a hard copy publication, The Roswell Deception, and then there will be, that's with Douglas Dietrich as the primary author. I'm writing it with him and publishing it. Then Radu has another book coming. I was told it should arrive soon, so I'll have something to work on there. And as soon as the book comes out and I get the copy, I will begin the translation process.
Oh, there's another show brewing in that one. So
he's got
here we are.
4 more books coming. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, and we will see you next week.
Thanks.
Thank you, Peter.
everybody.